Welcome back to this episode of Japan's top business interviews. Going to introduce an old friend of mine I have known for many years in Tokyo, and his name is Seth Sulkin. He is the president of Pacifica Capital, Pacifica Hotels, and also Foode. So he's actually a very busy man, but he's giving up some time today to join us. So Seth, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. Pleasure to be here.
So, Seth, how on earth do you wind up running three companies in Japan? How did you get here, and how did it turn out that you're in a number of businesses, so let's talk about that.
Well, there is a common element to my businesses. They're all related to hospitality. Okay. And so there's a lot of synergies between my real estate business and my food delivery business. So they're not as distinct as you might think from first glance. But to tell you how I got here, I first was transferred to Tokyo back in 1987 when I was a correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. And I had no Japan background, didn't speak Japanese, but back in the late 80s, Tokyo was the center of the world. And after having covered finance and capital markets and deregulation in New York and London, I requested a transfer to Tokyo because this just seemed the most exciting place in the world to be.
This is 1987.
1987.
Wow,
that's
okay.
Right. Yeah. And I had an incredible time. Living in Tokyo during the height of the bubble was, it's just one of those rare experiences that only happens every 1,000 years. It's just hard for people living here today to imagine what it was like back then.
Excess with a capital E, as I seem to recall.
It certainly was. Just people thought the party would never end, and they behaved accordingly. And it's completely different than life today. So I enjoyed life then, I enjoy life today. It's different, but I was glad I first experienced Japan during the bubble, and I experienced the burst of the bubble and everything in the middle. Tokyo is actually a much nicer place to live today than it was then. It was certainly exciting then, but it was a lot more expensive. Everything was more difficult. So things are cheaper. Everything's easier today. There's still plenty of things that are difficult, but compared to what it was back then, it's certainly a whole lot easier.
So did you leave the position with the Wall Street Journal here and go back to the States and then come back again, or did you stay here and then move into something else?
So I decided, I wish I could say that I predicted the internet, but I didn't. But I did see back then that my future in journalism, there wasn't anything I wanted to do, really. After having worked in New York, London, and Tokyo, I felt I'd already covered the world's leading cities, and I didn't really want to keep doing the same thing for another 30, 40 years. So I quit, went back to the US for graduate school, and then I came back a second time. And then I got involved in what I studied in graduate school was how Japan used a combination of aid, trade, and investment to promote economic development in Southeast Asia. And so when I came back, I got into that type of work. I was basically practicing what I had studied and wrote my thesis about.
And this is at Stanford? Was it Stanford?
Stanford, yes.
Right.
And so I was doing exactly what I had studied. And
so were you working with something like JICA or some Japanese agency?
So I worked for a quasi-governmental Japanese agency called the Japan Development Institute.
Okay.
We used a lot of JICA money along with OECF money. It was a combination of private sector money and Japanese government money to build infrastructure projects all over the world, not just Southeast Asia. I worked in a whole variety of countries ranging from Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, to Russia and Poland. And I was a project manager leading groups of Japanese engineers and consultants on all kinds of infrastructure and advisory. And I had a very exciting time, but after doing it for a while, there was sort of a limit as to what a non-Japanese could do in that role. And that, plus I would say the scale of the projects was so big that what I decided to do next was, I liked the real estate development aspect of what I did, but I wanted to do something more private sector focused, smaller scale that I could really get my hands around.
It's interesting because what you were doing with a focus on Southeast Asia is what I was doing my PhD on with a focus on China. And Australia has always been a big exporter of resources to Japan. And at that time, I thought that China would potentially take over from Australia and become the big supplier. And what we have, Japanese aid money going into double tracking of railways, power development, port development, that type of thing, to get the resources out of the country, just like they did for Australia, back in the 60s and 70s. So very much a parallel there. So coming out of that idea, how do you then, you're working for the JDI, I think it was called, and then you go into what?
So I went back a second time to the U.S., and I worked in the U.S. government when the Clinton administration started. I worked on defense policy related to Japan. In particular, I was doing...
This was in which department?
It was for part of the Defense Department. I was focused on trying to leverage dual-use technology to benefit both the U.S. and Japan. So, U.S. had great military technology, but wasn't very good at mass production. And so the idea was to try to work with Japan to take U.S. technology and hopefully create some manufacturing capabilities in the U.S., working with Japanese companies.
And so how does that get you back to Japan then? You could have stayed in that position, I guess, as long as the Clintons were around.
I having worked both in the U.S. and Japanese governments, I realized that the government wasn't for me. I'm a private sector person. I like doing what I want to do. Working in the government is just too slow and bureaucratic, and I don't really like having a boss. And so I realized that starting a company...
You realize you're unemployable.
Yes, so starting a company is really the best thing for me.
So how do you get yourself back to Japan, and how do you start a company?
Well, I started the company... I incorporated originally in the U.S., but it was always... The focus from day one was always Japan. I was based in Washington, D.C., but I was spending a lot of my time in Japan, not just in Tokyo. What I decided to do was, at the time, Japan was sort of the large-scale retail law had changed to allow large-scale shopping centers, large-scale stores. I saw an opportunity to develop U.S.-style shopping centers in Japan, and so that's what I did. I worked on the development of both of department stores and shopping centers all over Japan.
But how? You need a lot of capital for that. You need a lot of regulatory sign-off for that. There's a lot of players involved for the tenancies. You just don't get off the plane and say, okay, I'm here, get that mall organized, How did you get that to happen?
Yeah, well, for any young people who are watching this, I would certainly not recommend following my lead.
Don't do what I did, right?
Exactly. I'm the sort of person who just decides I want to do something and then I figure out how. That's a lot tougher to do today than it was back then. So back in the 90s, the capital markets in Japan were really behind. It was impossible for foreign companies to borrow money in Japan. There was no such thing as a non-recourse loan, which is the primary method that real estate funds and institutional investors borrow money. And so the only choice was really to work with a big Japanese company that had access to bank loans. So I worked with a variety of large Japanese partners who wanted to build US-style shopping centers, and they needed help to do that. So I built
So how did you identify them? Because you're in the States, you realize the law has changed. There's going to be a more dense concentration of retail at scale. How do you work out who are the people to approach and the partners that could possibly be someone you could work with?
Well, I guess it was mostly based on relationships. So I had worked with Japan at that point for about 10 years. And so I knew a lot of people, and leveraging my relationships got me introductions to leading Japanese railways and real estate companies, department stores. And so I was able to quickly build a business working with a variety of these companies to develop shopping centers and department stores.
And just, thinking about that, if you hadn't had those introductions, what would have what would it have been like? Would that have
It would have been impossible.
Impossible, right?
Yeah, impossible.
So if you'd come in and say, "Hi, I'm Seth. I've got a great idea. I know how these things work. I'm from the States. I'm here to help." It would have been like, "Thank you, but no thank you, Seth," right?
I mean, even today, a good idea is not enough. In the U.S., a good idea, you'll raise money, you'll start a business. It's just everything in the U.S. is easier. It's obviously more competitive, but getting started with a good idea is always possible. In Japan, without connections, relationships, a good idea is simply not enough, even today. And back then, it was even worse.
So what was your point of differentiation? Because, Japanese companies, the scale you're talking about, are big players. They have no problem sending any number of Japanese to the States to, they go down there and they research it, they talk to the big players in the States, they work up some sort of joint venture even to get the technology or the IP or whatever. So where does Seth's point of differentiation come into play here? They say, hey, this guy's the guy we want to work with.
It's a couple of things. I mean, first of all, there's never been a successful joint venture in the real estate sector between a major Japanese company and a major overseas company.
Okay, why is that?
Partially because real estate in Japan is so local that a big overseas developer doesn't really bring anything here. And so there have been a number of attempts. I don't think I want to mention names here, but there have been a number of tries, but none of them have been successful. Even major international retailers that are some of the biggest in the world have failed here miserably for the same reasons. So, most big overseas companies that are successful in their home market or even in a variety of countries automatically assume they can come to Japan and be successful. But if they don't hire the right people and don't come up with the right idea to localize whatever it is they do, they're not going to be successful. So as a small entrepreneur, I was able to bring the expertise that the Japanese companies needed while figuring out how to work with them and figuring out what they needed to do to be successful. A big overseas company just wouldn't have had the people to do it and couldn't probably have figured out what they could offer in Japan that made sense.
There's also that problem in Japan of when you're partnered with a big Japanese company and you're a very small company, that can be very painful for the small company a lot of the time. So how do you protect yourself in that arrangement so that you're not sort of crushed? What do they say in Southeast Asia? The mice shouldn't dance with the elephants because they're going to get crushed, right? So how do you not get crushed?
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, number one, the strength of the introductions I had. So the people who introduced me to some of these big Japanese companies, their credibility helped, because if the Japanese companies had tried to crush me, then it would have reflected poorly on the people who had introduced me.
So you had some air cover there.
Exactly,
nice.
That was part of it. And the other thing was, I think they generally needed me. So, and they recognized that. So it's, you said earlier that it's possible for big Japanese companies to just use brute force, send enough people overseas to learn. It's not that easy. If you're a big Japanese company, let's say you open up an office somewhere in the U.S., you study the market. U.S. companies don't really care who you are. I mean, they've never heard of you. They don't really care that you're the biggest whatever in Japan. It's irrelevant. So, there aren't that many Japanese who can easily fit into the business world in the U.S. So, I just don't believe that Japanese can that easily send people overseas, learn what they need to, and bring that technology back to Japan.
So you're a one-man band, I guess, at the beginning, but what point did you start to add team members?
Well, so I started off with about 5 people back in '95.
So let's just talk about that, because again, for a lot of companies, in '95, right, to get Japanese people to come to a company they've never, and particularly their mother and father have never heard of, that's not so easy to get people to take that risk and join. So how did you convince 5 Japanese to come and join you?
Well, keep in mind, I mean, initially headquarters was in the U.S., And so I probably had as many as 15, 20 people in the US office. And then I had a small office in Tokyo.
Oh, okay.
So I had maybe 3 people in Tokyo and then 10, 15, maybe maximum of 20 at one point in the US.
So for them, having a US-based operation gave them some sense of stability, and they could take, the risk of joining this small company in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of consider myself a persuasive kind of guy. And I try to win over people and companies with my ideas. And so, yes, there's some people, like you said, who are terrified of working for anything but a famous company, or whose parents won't let them. There's certainly a lot of people like that, and there used to be more. I mean, today it's certainly easier, but because what I tend to do is always unusual, different, and somewhat interesting, I can always find interesting people who are willing to work for me.
Nice. And so in that case of, this is focusing on leadership as a theme in this podcast. So you were managing a team in the States, you got a team in Japan, and you start to grow the team in Japan. What were the differences you found in Seth, the leader, to an American or, say, multinational probably audience of workers in the States and a Japanese audience in Japan? What did you find was a bit challenging to lead here compared to there?
Well, I think from the beginning, I've always tried to create a balanced work-life environment.
Okay.
And so that really makes a difference. So, I mean, we pay competitively. I won't say, I'm sure if you want to make a higher salary, you can go work for a financial institution and you can probably make more money, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a better quality of life. So we pay competitively, but we have, we never force people to work overtime. We've never had a lot of company events. And so really it's partially about how do I offer people a good quality of life. But in terms of the difficulties, certainly getting the word out, whether you're trying to sell an item or whether you're trying to hire people, it's just, the cost of advertising in Japan is prohibitive. And before the internet, it was even worse. Today, at least, you can advertise on the internet and it's still possible, but print advertising or advertising on a subway train or in a train station have always been insanely expensive. And so just getting the word out for any purpose has always been really, really difficult in Japan.
And still remains difficult.
Yes, but the internet has made
things much better.
Much easier.
That's true. So people, so you've been able to sell them on a vision of the future for Japan that you have seen operate in the States. You've been able to sell them on a work-life balance. That's something they could never get in a Japanese company. And so what are the things you found which are sort of pluses on the Japanese side that you would not get in an American side?
Well, so being a foreign capital company in Japan, there's many disadvantages, but the advantages are that Japanese who don't like the traditional work environment, they love coming to us. So, for example, women have always been discriminated against in the workforce, so I've always hired lots of qualified women. And then there's a Japanese term, wakeari, which means sort of unusual, something that doesn't quite fit in. Normally it's used for things like weird-shaped vegetables, but I hire a lot of people who are wakeari. They probably wouldn't fit into a big Japanese company, but they're great people, and they're a little bit quirky, they're a little bit unusual, but for me, they're great. And so the fact that they don't fit into a typical Japanese company, or that women don't have the same opportunities in big Japanese companies, is a huge advantage for a foreign company like mine.
Yeah, I'm always astonished that I keep meeting these, I'll call them young compared to me, they're young, they're in their 30s. They speak great English, they're international, they're well educated, they're very attractive, they're very smart, and they're single. And they just can't seem to find a guy, that can sort of be on their level. And so they wind up becoming very career-oriented because they can't find a mate. So I often worry about Japan in that regard. Sort of the best and the brightest are all staying single. So thinking about how big is the staff size? You've got 3 companies now that you're dealing across. So if we take the total number of people, how many we talk about?
Well over 100 now.
Wow, it's over 100 now.
Yeah.
So here's an interesting point. What did you notice when you started to scale up? Because at some point, Seth can't run everything by himself anymore, and he's got to start delegating down, and then you start getting people at the sort of direct report level and so forth and so on. You start to build a structure and a hierarchy and whatever. What things started to change did you notice that made it better or easier or harder as a leader?
So what I do is I hire good managers, and I manage the managers, and then I let them manage the larger staff. I don't micromanage. I pick and choose where I get involved. I try to focus on issues where I can add the most amount of value, and that means I can't get involved in every little decision. And Japanese, one of the problems with Japan is Japanese are reluctant to make decisions, particularly as individuals.
Why is that?
Because this society trains people to reach consensus decisions. I mean, that's the whole Ringi system is all about consensus. It's all about getting multiple approvals so no individual has to take responsibility for a decision.
We're all responsible, so nobody's responsible.
Exactly, and so I don't like that at all. So we use a Ringi system, but mainly so that I know that everyone else has checked and approved it before it comes to me, because I can't follow every detail of every decision, and so I have to know that a number of other people have checked it and are comfortable. So if I'm not an expert on every issue, at least I know that enough people have reviewed it that they're comfortable with what they're doing. But like I said, I just have to pick and choose where I focus my attention, and I can't, there's just too many decisions on a daily basis to get involved in everything.
So what's your delegation methodology? How do you actually give up some of that decision-making power, control to others? How do you do that?
So, I mean, most of my team, my core team, have worked for me for a long time. I would say 15 years or more is quite common. So in the headquarters, we have about 15 people. And the average term of duration, like I said, is probably about 15 years. So after 15 years of working with me, they know me pretty well. They know where I like to get involved and where I don't.
Well, let's wind back then. Let's wind back to when it gets to a point where you start to delegate and you're getting to a scale where you realise, well, I just can't cover all this off. I need to hand over control for certain parts of the business to my team. How did you go about doing that delegation? Because the reason I ask that, Seth, is because a lot of people tell me, look, Greg, delegation doesn't work. If you want it done properly, you've got to do it yourself, and delegation is a big myth. How did you find a way of delegating that worked for you?
If people can do that, they have much simpler lives than I do. Building a hotel is so complicated. There's no possible way I could do everything myself. I mean, I hire the best people I can find because it's way too complicated for me to make every little decision. We have an in-house architect who's our project manager. I mean, I couldn't go to all the construction meetings. I can't get involved in detail required for me to make every little decision. It's just simply not possible. I mean, same with hotels that are already open and operating. There's just, I can't be involved in deciding, which linen company we should be leasing the sheets from. I mean, that's just not my expertise. So I get involved in areas where, I think my experience and opinion is either different or better than my team's. And then where I think, they have the day-to-day expertise to make decisions, I let them make decisions. And I always tell people, if you're not comfortable making a decision, you're always welcome to ask for my advice and input. But if you're comfortable making a decision, just go ahead and do it.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. How comfortable are you then with mistakes? Because part of the delegation process is that you're giving people a chance to step out of a comfort zone, do something they're not used to doing potentially, high risk of having problems or failure or errors. And Japan is an error-free zone, like a defect-free zone in this country. So how do you, as a leader, think about the culture of mistakes? How do you handle mistakes in the company?
So I'm a big believer in the Japanese concept of horenso, hokoku rennaku sodan. So report, communication, and consult. So whenever someone in the headquarters joins the company, I always explain to them that this is critical to the way we operate. So I acknowledge that people make mistakes, but I always tell them, if you make a mistake, don't try to solve it by yourself. You can try quickly, but don't let it get out of control. And
don't hide it.
Exactly.
Which is the bigger fear, right?
Yeah, I always tell people, if you make a mistake, fine, just bring it to either me or your superior as quickly as possible.
And at that point, because this is really the rubber meets the road, isn't it? Because in a Japanese context, if it turns out that there's been an error made and their boss is aware of it, the Japanese bosses like to be screaming at them and abusing them verbally in front of everybody. That's a sort of standard operating procedure for a lot of Japanese bosses. So when they come to you, everyone must be watching those first few instances where there was an issue and they did bring it to you to see, okay, what's going to happen to me when I take Seth at his word and I turn up and I tell him that there's been a problem?
Yeah, I rarely get angry at people. I suppose when I get angry, it's because someone held on to a problem for too long and tried to solve it themselves, and clearly, the problem just got worse. I mean, that's when I might get angry. Whereas I said, if someone brings a problem early on, either to their immediate boss or to me, then the whole team can get involved in trying to solve it.
Yeah.
So, I don't get upset when people make mistakes and then they bring in other colleagues at an early stage.
How about engagement? Because you've got quite a big team, 100 people. And it sounds like with 15 in the headquarters, many of them are dispersed at different locations around the country, maybe even within Tokyo. So how do you get engagement? Because one of the things that comes up consistently when you're working in big corporates and they do engagement surveys is that the Japanese engagement score is always the global worst number. It's, APAC's always worse than everywhere else, and then within APAC, Japan's always the lowest. And so there's always this issue about, well, how come the Japanese are not engaged? Look at these scores. They're obviously not engaged, and there's also a lot of pressure internally on you, if you're leading Japan, to fix that problem. And there's a lot of reasons why the scores are not coming up. But just thinking about engagement generally, how do you help people to feel engaged with the company and with the vision or with the direction the company's going?
Two things. Number one, regular visits by both myself and my senior team, where we have offices in Chiba, in Osaka, in Kyoto, and another in Tokyo. And so we're constantly visiting our various offices. That's number one. And number two is regular communication. So we've had a dedicated phone line with our Chiba office for probably at least 10 years, which basically allowed us to speak unlimited for a fixed cost. Phone calls in Japan. I mean, now today people don't use the phone that much, because everything is VoIP. But used to be that we had to make expensive phone calls, and so we had a dedicated line to our Chiba office going back at least 10 years, and talking with them regularly. With our other offices, we have video cameras, and we do video meetings regularly. Not just people sitting at individual terminals, but people can sit in group office together. People can see each other's faces. I really think it helps promote communication. So that's something. So I would say those two things, regular face-to-face visits and frequent phone calls and online meetings.
So you have a vision to start the company. You're the founder. You've got everything invested in the company for you. And people who work for us are getting paid a salary. They have their families to feed. They have their own aspirations. How do you, on an individual level, engage those people to grasp the bigger picture here and commit to the vision that you have for the future?
Well, I would say people appreciate a good work-life balance. So, like I said, we pay a competitive salary. I don't micromanage them. I don't waste their time with sabi sangyo, fake overtime. We don't have a lot of company events. I encourage people to go home early, get their work done, go home early, and enjoy their private life.
Which is quite a radical opportunity in Japan, where it's, these days everyone's working at home, so it's better. But the typical format would be working quite late, like 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, we don't
last
do that.
Train home, crowded trains on the way back in the morning, working, not taking holidays. This is something, I have a similar approach to you in terms of we don't have overtime. They actually have to apply to be allowed to do overtime in my company. You can't just say, I'm going to work overtime. You have to apply, pre-approved to work it. But even with things like trying to encourage them to take holidays, and yet I look at the list, and I go, 30 days of leave, because they build it up. They get 20 days a year, and they don't take it. So over a 2-year period, they get like a max of 40, and they lose it. They lose it, as it turns over. And it's like, take the leave. But, no matter what I say, it doesn't seem to be, some are taking the leave, but a lot aren't. I never quite understand that. How do you get them to take the leave?
The pandemic is different, but prior to the pandemic, when things were slow, like, in August or at the end of the year, I would shut the company down, close the office early. When the previous emperor's birthday was December 23rd, and depending on what day of the week it was, we would shut the company at, around that time. For the year? Yeah. In August, for Obon, I would tell people, get out of here, take vacation. You're not missing anything. So that was one way. But like I said, encouraging, by treating people well and giving them interesting work as well. That's another thing, is by allowing people to make decisions on their own, to give them responsibility, not to micromanage them, to pay them well, and to encourage them to enjoy their personal lives has a remarkable impact. And as a result, people rarely quit. And also, I think because you're in a very tangible business. If you build a hotel, it's there, If you build a shopping mall, it's there. We do training, right? Like, it's intangible, right? And so you can't say, there's the training, right? Very hard to see the product, but you can see an output. So what's the sort of biggest hotel you've built? What's the biggest shopping mall your people have been part of? Well, the biggest hotel I built is 300 rooms, which is in the Namba area of Osaka, the Fairfield by Marriott. It opened last summer. And that'd be how many levels would that be? It's I think it's 11. So a pretty big building. Yep. Yeah, 300 rooms. It's a big building. Yeah. And how about shopping malls? Shopping mall. Vivid Square in Funabashi, Chiba, is a pretty big shopping center, and that one I built without a Japanese partner. Wow. Okay. So you got the key tenants. Got all the tenants. Organized. Well, over 100 tenants. You have the big players right in there. But we did all the leasing ourselves. Wow. Okay. Now that opened in 2004. And so the world had changed by then. We could get a non-recourse loan. That's why we didn't need a Japanese partner. It's not that the Japanese partner offered any expertise that I needed. It was just that we couldn't borrow without having the big balance sheet that the Japanese companies had. Around the year 2000, the capital markets changed. non-recourse loans came into existence.
Some people may not know that term, non-recourse loan. Can you just give us a very quick summation?
So the way Japanese companies typically borrow is if they want to build any type of real estate, they'll go to their bank and say, give me, 10 billion yen, and they'll pledge all of their company's assets. A non-recourse loan means that the bank only has recourse to the asset that you're borrowing against. So if you're building a hotel or a shopping center and things don't work out, the bank can only foreclose on that specific asset, but can't come to the company and take anything else.
Including, I guess, do you have directors' guarantees as well?
No.
No, so that means your house is safe, your
Correct.
Personal wealth is safe, it's all tied up in the project.
Yeah, the only exceptions would be, if I, lie or cheat or steal.
Right.
But as long as I operate normally, the bank can't come after me personally or. So it's different situation.
And so thinking about innovation in Japan, it's linked to engagement in the sense that if you are not engaged, you don't care to do it better or make it better or, come up with something different. You just don't care. So level one is sort of having people engaged in the business. And level two is then taking that engagement and bringing out the ideas. Now, people often say, Japan, they don't have any ideas. They're very good copying. They got Kaizen, down to a T, perfect on that. But that's iteration. It's not origination. But my experience has been quite the opposite. When I've done brainstorming with Japanese teams, and we teach this now as part of Carnegie, I'm always astounded by the quality of the ideas that come up. So I always believe they have got a lot of ideas. But tapping those ideas seems to be a little bit of a challenge for a lot of companies because the way they approach it doesn't work very effectively. So tell us a little bit about how you get innovation for the team.
Sure. So before I answer that, though, I should say, while Japanese are, I would say in general, are less motivated purely by money than Westerners are. Money is important in Japan, of course, but it's not, people don't worry about the size of their bonuses nearly to the same extent that in the U.S. or other Western countries. So that's one issue.
Well, are you paying performance bonuses or are you paying sort of 14 months of salary in
So people do notice. So when the company has a good year, or someone does something particularly useful for the company, they notice, there's a big difference in their compensation.
Right.
So their base salary goes up more, their bonus goes up more.
Yep.
So yes, when the company has a good year, there's a big difference in how well people get paid compared to when the company has a bad year.
Right. Okay.
So
relate that now to innovation, please.
So people have some incentive because they see the difference. Particularly if they've worked for me for a long time, they since 1995 we had the global financial crisis, we had the earthquake, and now we have the pandemic.
Yep.
And so we've had sort of three really negative crises, and they see what things are like at that time, but I've never laid anybody off during any of these crises.
Well, that's a key point because if you look at America and you've got a company start in America, immediately people are fired. Immediately there's a downturn, pandemic, okay, you're all fired. So why did you not apply that, I would say, I may be wrong, I'm not American, but it seems to me to be a typical American approach of fire everybody straight away. Why did you not apply that in Japan?
Well, the labor market in the U.S. is much more fungible, meaning it's easier to get rid of people and it's easier to get people back. Here, it's much more challenging.
Why? Why is that?
Well, legally, it's very difficult to fire people. In a crisis, when the company's really in trouble, it's somewhat easier, but it's still challenging. That's one issue. And then it's much harder to hire people. Good people anyway. It's harder to identify them. Like I said, I don't really have the issue that people say, my mother has never heard of you, therefore I can't work for you. I think that's only happened once in over 25 years. Maybe about 15 years ago, I had an employee quit because his father got him a job at a famous company.
Yeah.
And
he was miserable ever since.
And he didn't last. I mean, I think he lasted maybe a year at the company that his father introduced him to.
You'd give him a taste of freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was quirky. I mean, he was a typical quirky guy that I hire, and he just didn't like the work. I mean, I remember it was a manufacturing company, but as a new employee, first thing he had to do was he had to go work in the company cafeteria. And he hated it. He said, no, I mean, why did I give up a good job to go work in the company cafeteria? This is insane. Mm. And so, but all new employees had to do that. So eventually he tried to come back, but I already replaced him at that point.
So you're paying on performance, and so people see the benefit of having a good year. And what about that creativity part? What about how do we make this whole enterprise better? How do you tap into that potential?
So I pay both bonuses based on company performance as well as individual performance, but I tend to focus more on company performance. So yes, I mean, if someone does something amazing for the company where it's clear that them as an individual made a huge difference, I will give them an outsized personal bonus. But I try to focus people to help work together to benefit the company. Mm. And so people see when the company does well. Like I said, they see it in their compensation. And so I try not to make a lot of decisions on my own. So I try to have, we don't have a lot of meetings compared to Japanese companies. Our meetings are very short, but we do call whenever we are either thinking about doing something new, like, these days my real estate business is mostly focused on hotels. So for example, last week we were introduced to a bunch of hotels that we could potentially manage. And so we had an internal meeting to go through them, to look at which of these hotels we liked and which we didn't like, and everyone was encouraged to discuss their opinions. So people listen in, they participate, they offer their opinions, and this helps us reach the best decisions.
So that's also interesting, isn't it? Because in a lot of cases, in a room where there are people who are older, male, more senior, often in Japanese organizations, the younger people, particularly females, will stay silent. They'll defer to the older senpai, the seniors, etc. How do you get around that problem? Or do you just have such a bunch of quirky people down there, they don't care about any of that stuff?
I would say it's a combination. We have a lot of powerful women. Mm-hmm. I have two of my hotels are run by women, which is very unusual in Japan, to have women general managers. Pacifica Capital has a woman director, which is also quite unusual. And then for a long time, we had a woman running, we operate a cinema complex. We had a woman running that. So, I put women in a lot of powerful positions, and I don't treat them any differently than I would men. Mm. So that's one thing. And young people are encouraged to contribute their opinions as much as older people. And so we don't have...
How do you do that, though? Because obviously, you can say to people, yeah, well, everyone feel free to speak up and give your opinion, listening to you, right? But they're looking around the room going, nope, I'm not going to do that. So how do you actually make that happen?
I think when you work for a foreign company with a foreign boss, you think differently. Mm-hmm. And so maybe someone in their 20s without a lot of experience may not have a lot to say. So it's not that they're afraid of saying anything, they just don't yet have the expertise. Mm-hmm. But one of the reasons why I still invite them to the meetings is because they're going to be involved, assuming that we do something, they're going to be involved in implementing the decision. Mm-hmm. That's why I want them there.
Have some buy-in,
because
ownership.
I want them to understand why we're making a decision to do something, mm-hmm. because they'll be involved in running it, and so I want them to understand why we're doing something.
And thinking about one of the big things in Japan too is I see that everything here is based on trust. You know, you are the devil they know, and you are much more preferable to any angels that they don't know, you know. So becoming that devil that they know in the first place is extremely difficult. And you talked about having people introduce you to the companies to break through and have that connection, so that you became the devil that they know. And they keep using you because they know, okay, this guy does what he says, he's reliable, he's a known entity, low risk, good. And so, but still, everything is based on trust here. And so how do you get that trust in the team? How do you build that sense of trust in you as a leader, or the trust in the organisation on the team members' part?
Well, after more than 25 years, we have a pretty good track record. Mm-hmm. You know, I think we've done some pretty amazing things for a small foreign company.
What about when you weren't here for 25 years? We go back. So a lot of people watching this may be thinking, when I grow up, I want to be like Seth. I want to have my own company. I want to have 100 people. I want to be having 11-story hotels. I want to have massive big shopping malls with, you know, a ski jump in the middle of it, or whatever you've got out there in Chiba. And I want to be like that. But they're going to start relatively small, as you did. And at some point, you worked out, okay, I have to give an environment here where people are going to have something differentiated from what Japanese companies can provide. I can hire women who are credible and incredible. I can have quirky people who wouldn't fit anywhere else, but they'll fit in here. You can do all of those things. But at some point, you didn't have 25 years of trust. You didn't have 25 years of achievements, but you had to create that sense of trust. So how did you do that?
Well, so in the beginning, it was two things. I mean, number one, the force of my ideas. You know, I don't like taking no for an answer. And so I come up with good ideas and I convince people.
And of course, you never get no for an answer in Japan, do you?
Well, you know, it's funny. Over time, the meaning of the word kento shimasu has changed.
It actually, yeah, that's true.
It used to mean no.
Yes, that's true.
Now it often means that people are seriously considering it.
Yes, that's a good point.
So
yes.
I used to hate being told that, and now I'm actually happy when someone says that, because it means they're seriously considering what I'm proposing to them.
Yeah, that's right.
But, you know, we haven't really talked about my new company, Foode, but with Foode, it's been an amazing experience.
Talk about what Foode is for people, because I know what Foode is because I'm a foodie, I love food, but people may not know what Foode does. Just give us a quick overview of Foode.
So Foode is Tokyo's first gourmet restaurant delivery app. So, you know, if you're familiar with Uber Eats or Demaikon, we're a gourmet version of that. We have an exclusive group of restaurants and luxury hotels that only deliver through Foode. We use professional drivers to deliver on motorcycles to deliver the food fast and carefully. Our drivers are clean and polite and motivated, and they do a great job. And our restaurants are good. I mean, you know, some of the best restaurants in Tokyo work with Foode.
So was Mother's Day a big day for Foode yesterday?
It was great, actually, yes, for two reasons. I mean, we got a lot of orders yesterday, but one of our restaurant partners is the Tokyo American Club.
Oh, okay.
And for the first time in their more than 100-year history, it's possible for non-members to order directly, only through Foode, of course. But they had a special several sets of food for Mother's Day. And so we delivered a number of people, you know, Mother's Day sets for people who didn't feel comfortable going to eat at the club.
Pecan pie by delivery or something, very American of fare, I guess.
Big turkey and chicken and roast beef and all kinds of things. But so it's but the reason I raised this is because in all my time, so I've been dealing with Japan since 1985, so over 35 years. And in all my time dealing with Japan, I never thought Japanese companies could make fast decisions. Before I started Foode, I never saw it happen once. And then I think a combination of Foode being the right business, the right concept, and as well as the pressure that a lot of restaurants and hotels are in during the pandemic, this combination has caused people to say yes. So in the beginning, for the first 3-4 months of Foode, over 90% of the restaurants that I went to visit would say yes during the first meeting.
Unbelievable.
I've never seen this before in all my time of dealing with Japan.
Don't get used to it, Seth. After the pandemic goes away, they might revert back to normality, which the usual answer is no to everything, right?
Well, the usual answer would have been in the past kento shimasu, which usually meant no, or maybe it meant they would consider it, but it would have been difficult to say yes to something. Now people say yes quickly, which is a very pleasant experience.
Yeah. So how does that relate back to the trust issue? Like, this is a new business, you're starting up something new. How do you get people to get behind this? This is a very innovative idea that you've come up with, right? So this is interesting too. You came up with the idea, I presume, rather than one of your team saying, hey, boss, I got this great idea. How did that work?
Yes. So I came up with the idea. So when Japan declared the first emergency last April, I started working from home, but I was eating out every day, mainly just to get some fresh air and take a walk. There was no one else in the restaurant, so because I operate restaurants in my hotels, I have restaurant tenants, so I have a big presence in the food and beverage industry. So I was just initially comparing notes with the owners or the chefs, just to understand how they were doing compared to how we were doing. And they were all telling me the same stories, how they couldn't work with the other delivery companies because the commissions were too high or the quality of the deliveries was bad. And so after hearing the same story over and over, I realized there's a business opportunity here. And so I changed the business model. So, we have a unique business model. I've studied the business model of food delivery companies, not just in Japan, but all over the world. And we have a unique business model. And that's why so many restaurants say yes quickly, because I created it specifically to meet the needs of high-end restaurants.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So how do you get the message out? We talked before about mainstream advertising is prohibitive, really, for small companies. You've got the internet as an availability there. How do people find out about Foode? So they go, okay, we're in lockdown again. We want to have some nice meal at home. It's Mother's Day or it's someone's birthday or some special occasion. We don't want to go out because it's not safe. Let's have it at home, but let's have something really nice at home. How would they find out about it?
Getting the word out to consumers is an entirely different matter to the restaurants. So in the beginning, because I'm in the hotel industry and in the food and beverage industry, I could identify places that I knew who I wanted to be on Foode. And so I would go see them. They knew me, they knew my track record, and they said yes, or I got introductions, and the business model met their needs, and so people quickly said yes. And now, actually, most of our restaurants are approaching us. Now, sometimes we say
nice.
no,
That's
but
nice.
The food and beverage industry is very tightly knit, and there's a lot of word of mouth in the industry, and so restaurants and hotels hear about us from their friends. They approach us. We review them. Sometimes we ask them to join. Sometimes we don't. But with consumers, I have to say it's a lot tougher.
Yeah.
Without the internet, we couldn't exist because print advertising is just way, way too expensive. Now, we use a variety of means, both internet as well as traditional. So I would say our most cost-effective means is the internet. Advertising on Facebook and Instagram, YouTube, Google, Yahoo. I would say Facebook is probably the most effective way for us. We get a lot of customers through Facebook.
I think it lends itself in a way to Facebook, doesn't it? Because you can show the visual of the food, and my wife's Japanese. I don't watch much television myself, to be honest, anymore, but the little bit of television I happen to be watching at home is always food shows. No matter what time of the day there's some food show on, someone, stuffing something in their mouth saying how oishi it is. So there's that very high appreciation of good food, interest of good food in Japan, and they like looking, and they're always taking photographs. If we go out for a nice meal, my wife whips out the camera and she's taking a photograph of the meal, right? So it lends itself to that in a way, doesn't it, that type of medium?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. But the main reason why it's the most, online advertising is the most effective is because we can target it. So, our average order is about 15,000 yen.
Oh, nice, yeah.
So that's probably 8 to 10 times the other delivery services. And that means not everybody either wants to or can afford to order from us. And we also don't serve all of Japan or even all of Tokyo yet.
So for the Facebook, I mean, there's nothing that says, from what I remember, any income distribution you can pick.
No, that's right. We can't.
Okay, where's the rich person button? I want to send my ad to that group.
You're
right?
correct, but we can target geographically.
Okay, so you might be Minato-ku, for example.
Yeah, so targeting geographically is very, very effective for us. So that's great. Yeah. And then, but we also, we go into traditional print publications, both in English and Japanese. We've had stuff in the ACCJ Journal, in Eurobiz, in Forbes Japan, Story, which is a women's magazine. We do chirashi, meaning
flyers, basically.
Flyers put in people's mailboxes.
Right.
We do. This month, we're doing probably a couple 100,000 of those.
Wow. But how about the team, right? So this is a group of people who've been doing really hardcore skills of construction and tenant organization.
It's an entirely different team.
And now, so how did you recruit the team? Or?
So what happened was, so when I decided to start Foode, people were still working at home. I founded the company May of last year. So my Pacifica real estate team was all working at home, and we were doing every day. We would do chode. We'd do a brief online call for all staff in the morning. And so one morning I said to people, "I'm starting a food delivery company. Does anybody want to get involved?" And nobody said yes.
Really?
And so I didn't force it.
Why do you think that was?
Maybe because in the beginning I didn't, I didn't offer anyone anything. I just said, "Is anyone interested in getting involved?"
Right.
And if anyone had said, "I'm interested," then I would have figured out, how to pay them differently or how to split their responsibilities. But because no one said yes, I didn't have to worry about it.
And do you think no one put their hand up because they were concerned that they might fail because they had no experience in that area? Were they thinking, well, that's not really what I do. I'm more, dealing with tenants or dealing with construction companies. That's really my wheelhouse. I don't know anything about this stuff. Apps, what the hell is an app, What do you think the reluctance was?
Probably because, for Japanese, it's harder to pivot like I can.
Yeah.
So
you had to go and recruit a whole new crew.
Correct.
Now, that was interesting. How did you, I guess in one way, perhaps because of the pandemic, there are a lot of people who lost their jobs. So, sad that is. And it's from the airlines, hotels, right across the board, very capable, smart, high-quality people through no fault of their own are out of a job, because just the pandemic's created havoc in that industry. So in a way, I guess you did have a population that was more perhaps mobile, fungible is a term you used before. So was that an advantage, or did you actually find that there was a group of people who had that particular skill, expertise area that you needed who were available, who were separate to that group?
Well, as a startup, Foode didn't have the budget to pay recruiters.
Right.
And so we posted our jobs online, and that worked. So I hired several people through online job postings. I hired people both who had jobs. I hired one person straight out of university. I hired someone who had lost a job because of the pandemic. People were in various circumstances.
Right. Okay. And so how has the business gone in that time? How many many people you've got working in Foode now?
So Foode has 8 people.
That's quite quick in such a short space of time.
And then, of course, we have our drivers are not full-time employees. They are we outsource the actual delivery to professional transportation companies. So we get full-time professional drivers who know the roads, who are ride motorcycles. They keep the food stable. They're fast. It's an entirely different experience than what other delivery companies do. So some things have been fairly easy, like signing up restaurants. Other things have been hard. Raising money, both equity and debt. We actually did get a bank loan, believe it or not.
Wow. Well done.
Special program.
Was it non-recourse?
Yes.
Oh, we're super well done.
I did not have to make a personal guarantee.
Wow.
Which is normal in Japan.
Yes.
They expect the president of the company to
Absolutely.
personally guarantee. I did not have to do that.
Firstborn child will be handed over to the bank until you earn the money back, right?
That's right. So that was good. But I would say particularly large venture capital companies are very conservative. So basically, they don't want to take risk. I mean, that's venture capital is all about taking risk, but in Japan, it's like everything else. People don't want to make mistakes.
Well, I think there's a difference. I think in the States, it's about managing risk. In Japan, it's about avoiding risk. And there's quite a big
people, entrepreneurs who have failed, tend to be more successful. Very few people are successful on their first try.
Yep.
And companies are not afraid to hire people who have failed. Like I said, they appreciate the experience. In Japan,
except in Japan.
Yeah, in Japan, because I'd never done an internet startup before, people looked at me and said, "Well, what do you know about it?" And
And you said?
I said, look at where I am. I mean, I said, look at all of our restaurants that have signed exclusive contracts with us. Why are we the only food delivery company that has exclusive contracts with the restaurants? Why do we have such high customer satisfaction? So I just say, look at the result. I didn't try to raise money until we'd been basically about 6 months of operations, so that people could see
some track record.
Yeah, and I could say, here's a list of our restaurants. These are pretty famous restaurants and hotels. They think we're doing something right. You should too. But
and is this something that those 8 people can say? I mean, if you're joining this particular, band of brothers and sisters here, are you thinking, well, I'm going to be doing this for maybe another year, and then finally the Japanese government will roll out the vaccines, we'll have the Olympics, we'll have the super spreader event, then eventually the super spreader event will be finished, and we'll all be back into restaurants as per normal, and this delivery at the high quality exclusivity whole concept will just go away and we'll go back to what it was before. How do you actually get people to sign on knowing there's a possibility this whole enterprise could go away?
Japan has had delivery for hundreds of years. The concept of demai has been around since the Edo period. Now, Japan has a very small food delivery industry compared to other countries. For example, even Korea, which has a population of something less than half of Japan, the delivery market is probably 7 to 8 times bigger than Japan.
Is that right? Really? I didn't realize.
US and UK also far bigger than Japan. So what the pandemic is doing is it's introducing people to delivery for the first time. And so once people try delivery and they find out they can get great food delivered to their homes or their office or the park or wherever they want to be, they're going to continue using it even after the pandemic is over. And the pandemic really is never going to be completely over.
That's true. That's true.
It's going to come back. I mean, unfortunately, we're never going to be 100% safe. And so, and delivery was existed in Japan not just for a couple hundred years. I mean, Demaikon's been around for 20 years. Uber Eats was growing rapidly before the pandemic. Like I said, it's still small compared to other countries, but it was growing quite rapidly before the pandemic. Now, obviously, during the pandemic, it's grown a whole lot more. And then there have been a number of new market entrants other than us. many of which have raised overseas a lot of venture capital money, and they're spending a lot of it on advertising, which makes me very happy because
concept is being
exactly they're teaching people that food delivery
They're educating
exists.
your client base.
So I'm very happy. People can try one of the other delivery companies, let them be dissatisfied with the quality of the food or the delivery they're getting, but then thinking, wow, I really wish I could get food delivered that I liked, and with the driver was nice and clean and polite, and the food was good. I'm willing to pay a little bit extra for that. So I think once people get accustomed to the idea of delivery, they'll continue using it after the pandemic.
Good idea. So, Seth, we've talked about a number of things to do with leadership. Is there anything I haven't asked you about leadership which I should have?
Yes. One of the benefits of not having a boss is I'm free to speak my mind.
Oh, okay. That sounds dangerous.
And, when I was a journalist, a lot of companies had very strict policies about speaking to the media. And sometimes someone from the media department would sit in on the interview, or they had to check the quotes, or they had to get permission.
Yep.
I don't need to get anyone's permission to talk with you or
Yep.
to give a media interview. But I also feel like, there's always a debate online, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or elsewhere, about the proper role for foreign residents of Japan.
Okay.
And some people say we're guests of this country, we shouldn't be speaking our opinions, which I just find that to be absolutely absurd. I'm not a citizen, but I pay taxes. I invest a huge amount of money. I have
You employ a lot of people?
I have over 100 people. I've created a massive amount of economic output in this country. I have just as much right to express my opinion publicly as a Japanese citizen does. And I feel like because I'm in a position, because I have opinions, and because I have no restrictions on making them public, I feel like it's very important to express my opinions. And so I'm frequently expressing my opinions in interviews, in speeches.
So what you're saying, are you encouraging other leaders here to step up and do the same?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's because Japanese are frequently either unable or unwilling or restricted from expressing their opinions. I think it's particularly important for foreign leaders or Japanese leaders who can to express opinions.
To what point?
Well, when they have something useful to say that could shape the public dialogue. So, for example, Saturday morning, this past Saturday, I was sitting at home frustrated that Japan has done such a terrible job with vaccinations.
Yep.
And I just thought, okay, I've got to put out my opinion on this. So I wrote an article on LinkedIn where I talked about what the problem with Japanese thinking on vaccination is, and I compared it to other countries, particularly US, UK, and I said, Japan could be doing a much, much better job. And for Japanese, mainly for cultural reasons unique to Japan, Japan has failed. And it's just completely unnecessary. So whenever I express my opinion about Japanese policy, I try to be constructive. I don't just say something's bad. I try to say what should be done to make it better.
So you're encouraging other leaders to do the same?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. If we're going to think about some advice, when we can get back on planes, at some point we'll be sent here and they'll be told, okay, you've got to go to Japan and run our operation there. Or they've already come and they've just started and they don't know Japan. And so for them, it's really a journey of discovery. What would be 3 pieces of advice, or a couple of pieces of advice anyway, it doesn't have to be 3, but let's say a couple of pieces of advice that you'd give to someone who didn't know Japan, who is in a leadership position to become more successful as a leader here?
I mean, most likely someone who's coming here for a short-term assignment is not going to speak Japanese and won't know a lot about Japan. So assuming that type of person is coming here, I would encourage them to read as much as possible before they get here. And there's a lot of really good books about Japanese culture generally, but also Japanese business culture specifically. So that, I think, is very helpful. Hiring an assistant or having a chief of staff or an assistant who can help steer you through and make your stay here better, I think, is also really critical. If you work for a large company that has the budget to do that, then make sure you hire the right person, who's completely bilingual, who understands Japanese business culture well. That's absolutely critical. But going out and meeting people, both in your personal time as well as in your business life, don't sit in your office all day. Go out and meet people. Go out and see things. I think you'll have a much more richer experience, and you'll learn a lot more, and you'll contribute much more by doing that.
Okay. What else?
Have an open dialogue with your staff. Ask for their ideas.
Okay.
Don't micromanage. Particularly, like I said, if you don't speak Japanese and you don't know a lot about Japan, that's tough. So
should they learn Japanese or try to learn Japanese?
No, absolutely not. No, it's
Why?
completely unrealistic.
They'd be here on a 3 or 4 year posting.
No. It takes. I became fluent with 1 year of extremely intensive study. Unless you're prepared to make that commitment, particularly if you're coming here middle-aged with a family, you'll never be able to make that commitment. I did it when I was young and single, and it was hard work, but I did it. If you're coming here for a 3 to 5 year assignment, it's just not realistic. You should, once you get here, you can take enough Japanese lessons so you can talk to a taxi driver or order in a restaurant, but using Japanese at work is not a realistic goal. So no, you should not even try to attempt that.
Okay. All right. One last one. One more point, if you have one. Don't have to have one, but if you have one.
I don't.
Pretty good. How do people find out about Foode? Now you've got them interested. Say, hey, listen, you can get the really top-of-the-shelf chef's creations here delivered very promptly to your door. Yes, we just had Mother's Day, but there's plenty of other opportunities coming up. We're going to need to have something special. Surprise the family with something really they haven't thought is possible. How do they find out about Foode, and how do they get that delivery happening?
Yes, so you go to foode-e.co.jp.
So it's food-e.co.jp. Yep.
Yes, and we're fully bilingual.
All right, great.
So you can look in English, you can look in Japanese. We offer telephone customer service, both in English and Japanese. We're the only company that does it.
And is that something you've outsourced or something you've got internal?
That is both. We have part of it outsourced and part of it is handled internally.
Right.
But no other company offers fully bilingual menus, fully bilingual customer service. No other company does that.
Right.
And we're introducing an iPhone app very soon.
Great.
And you can go, right now it's a web app. So from any type of smartphone, tablet, PC, you just go have a look at our restaurants. We're open 7 days a week. You can order lunch, you can order dinner, you can schedule orders up to a week in advance. You can do corporate orders. You can, these days, just because a lot of people are not in the office, our corporate business is not so strong. But from October to December last year, in between emergency declarations, we had a pretty good corporate business.
Okay.
Catering executive lunches. We did a
nice.
Conference. Yeah. So, and then, a lot of special events. Like I said, Mother's Day, we have Father's Day coming up. We have special items available for that. You can order an afternoon tea set. Afternoon tea is one of the biggest things saving hotels right now.
Really? Okay.
Hotels are booked for months in advance for afternoon tea.
Wow.
So now, if you can't get a reservation in your favorite luxury hotel,
it'll come to you.
Order on Foode.
Wow. Okay. That's fantastic. So thank you very much. This has been fascinating. I knew a little bit about Foode, but now I know a lot more, which is great. So thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you, Greg.
Thank you. So please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.